So I wanted to invite Dr. Bethany Hopkins, who's a senior career advisor for master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral scholars at the UC Davis Internship and Career Center. She earned her PhD in history from UC Davis in 2015, and she joined the ICC staff in 2018. In addition to workshops, she offers one-on-one confidential career advising appointments for grad students and postdocs in any field on all career-related topics. And so today we are again pleased to have her speaking as part of the PhD Unlimited series. And I'm going to hand over the presentation to Bethany. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Stephanie. So I'm going to get set up here to share my screen because I have some slides and some examples I'd like to share with you. As I do that, I'd like to invite you, if you want to share something about yourself to introduce yourself, you can use the chat to do that. So you might say, you know, what if you're a master's or PhD student, the program or field you're in, something about why you wanted to come to this workshop. That would be great. You don't have to, but I'm going to encourage you to do that as I get set up with sharing my screen. To share some slides with you. Okay, you should be seeing my screen now. And just as a reminder, it's a little bit hard for me to see the chat feature sometimes while we do this. I'll try to respond if I see questions or comments there, but feel free to leave them, and Stephanie could draw my attention if there's something that I've missed. So you should also see live captions that are happening right below so that you can catch things I'm saying that may not be covered in the slides. Great, thanks for coming today to Crafting Your Graduate School Story for Employers. Thanks for introducing yourself there. I see some folks doing that, and I see a few familiar names. It's nice to see some of you here on Zoom. Before we get started, just make sure your audio is muted unless you are trying to come off mute to ask a question. Use the chat feature to ask questions or leave comments. And then there will be an event survey at the end, and that really helps us to gauge, especially for something that's a new workshop, a little bit about your experience in it. So thank you for staying to that and being willing to fill that out. Great. So here's a little bit about what the workshop will go over in order. We've done the introductions part. I'm going to talk about reframing your story, translating your story, prototyping your story, and then a little bit on putting it all together. And then there'll be time for question and answers there at the end. Great, you already know a little bit about me, but I will put it here as well. And I'll try to pop some links in the chat for you as I am able to, so that you can easily access those. I know slides are a little bit less accessible. So there's me, there's my email. Again, my name is Bethany Hopkins. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and that's my email address down there at the bottom. Great, thank you for sharing a little bit here. Okay. So I actually want to start with reframing your graduate school story. Some of you are starting to introduce yourself, telling a little bit about your story in the chat. I want to start with reframing your graduate school story for yourself. I know that the workshop is about crafting it for employers, but you are your own first audience. And I'm going to compare here the academic framework versus a kind of beyond academia framework in each of these areas, because I think that helps us understand the story that we're used to telling ourselves and telling others, and then how we might be changing that if we're crafting our graduate school story for employers. So in an academia framework, that graduate school story might be becoming more narrow as you become more specialized. It might more be focused on your research, teaching, and service as these kind of broad categories you use to talk about what you're doing. I might also invite, I think, sometimes some comparison between you and another graduate student in your field. For beyond academia, I'm going to encourage you to reframe that story as maybe more broad, and one that's focused on your personal values and accomplishments, as well as those core categories. And ideally, a framework that would invite more exploration. Again, you're doing this first for yourself, so you are your own first audience. And one way that is really helpful for folks to start thinking about this, start telling themselves new stories. Actually, something called the 7 stories exercise. And I did not create this. This is adapted from Kate Wendleton and Bernard Haldane. But the idea is to write down 7 enjoyable accomplishments. And these can be from any time in your life. They don't have to be just graduate school. And they should be anything you both enjoyed doing and did well. So you want to get more than 1 or 2 of these. Then you also want to make sure you can add not only that you enjoyed them and that you accomplished something, add why you enjoyed them. What gave you that sense of accomplishment? That's really important to telling your own story to yourself. And then finally, once you have multiple of these, you can start to identify themes that appear in multiple stories. That's really helpful for understanding the themes of your graduate school story for the ones that took place in graduate school. And yes, to just respond to the comment, yes, the slides, there will be a recording of this. This is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to access this later. Here is an example. Some of these examples I've given are hypothetical. This one, I'll just say this is actually one I did myself, so I'll give you a personal example. Before, I had, as part of my story, something on my CV where I was a teaching assistant coordinator. I was a TA coordinator for my department one year. It was often just one line on my curriculum vitae that I would have near the end. It was a kind of service activity, I thought of it as. And after I reframed it as what was the story and why did I enjoy, what did I accomplish? So I ran for and was elected to that TA coordinator position in my department. And I revamped that 10-week course. I did it to include the hidden curriculum of TAing, a workshop on handling bias in the classroom. I invited guest speakers. I was really proud of it because I created what I thought was a more holistic professional development series to support new graduate students. Reframing what I was proud of doing in that role helped me to expand how I might tell that story more broadly, more than just the narrow focus of what that line was, what that job was that I had. So again, I encourage you, I'm going to have a few examples of something you can jot down to yourself throughout here. So this is a kind of a quick write. So if you wanted to make a note for yourself, what would be one enjoyable accomplishment from grad school that is not a highlight anywhere if you were to create a CV right now? So it's not something that you would be highlighting for an academic employer. Maybe it doesn't even make it on the CV at all. Maybe it's something from your volunteering, and maybe it's something that doesn't typically go on a CV that you would create for a job. So this is something, if you can write down something right now, you're like, there's something I can think of that I did that I was really proud of, just personally. That will tell you a lot about what your values are and what is important to you to accomplish. That's going to be an important part of your story. Great. So for a few of these, the quick write, it's maybe not enough. You'd want to go through the whole 7 stories exercise, but I'll have ideas for following up. If reframing to you sounds like the place you want to start, you're like, I need to do more work there. On your own, you can do it by digging deeper into the values. So your own personal values often shape a lot of what is giving you a sense of accomplishment. That's an important part of your story. Knowing what that is, knowing those core values. I'm going to mention that there's a few places you can assess your values online. One of them you'll hear about in the next PhD Unlimited event series, Imagine PhD. There's a values assessment there. There's also a more expanded kind of life values inventory. Put those links there in the chat. This could be something that if you wanted to make a career exploration advising appointment as you kind of follow up reframing that story for yourself. That's something that you can do through the Internship and Career Center. You could even do this in a group. There are sometimes career exploration groups or courses that are available. One is the GCEG, Graduate Career Exploration Group, that's offered sometimes through Student Health and Counseling Services. There's also an American Studies course I sometimes teach, AMS 298, on designing your professional life. So there are opportunities sometimes in groups to follow up on this reframing of what those stories are and what those values are. I start with this because I did not know this initially. And I'll tell you what happens if you think I can just skip this. It's not really like as important as the other parts, the actual applying or trying to communicate to employers. You'll end up applying for and maybe even interviewing for jobs. And then after, like in that process, asking yourself, wait, what do I actually like doing? Would I like doing this job? Is it similar or different to what I have felt a sense of accomplishment and what is important to me in the past? You'll end up doing it as you're moving on. And so I actually think this should be foundational for all of us. That's the reason I start here. Okay, but reframing is really one of the only, one of the components, one of the first components of crafting your graduate school story for employers. So let's move on. Let's talk about translating that graduate school story. So you've started to tell yourself new stories, you started to reframe, but you need to think about the language you'll be using to do that. And beyond academia, for those employers, you'll want to get more comfortable using the language of skills. And that may not be something you've done as much. In academia, especially in humanities and arts and social sciences, you might not need to translate as much of what you've done. So I kind of come back to the CV because it's a document many people are familiar with all the things that they have done in graduate school. So established categories like the degree you're working on, a publication or a grant or a fellowship, your teaching or TAing experience. Within graduate school and within academic jobs, that may need very little translation. But beyond academia, translation is needed. It's needed to describe your graduate school experiences, and you need to do it where you translate it into the language of skills. If this is new to you, this is something I would encourage you to start getting more comfortable with really early on. So when I say skills, I'm curious, and there might be those of you here who are very used to using the language of skills and thinking of what you do in terms of skills. What is a skill? What even is that? You don't want to take a stab at this? It's actually, you can put it in the chat if you have a thought. What is a skill? A concrete thing you do? Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, it's a thing you do. And specifically a skill is something you can do well. So anything you can do well could be considered a skill. And skills are really key for employers beyond academia, especially transferable skills. And maybe you've heard that term and I know that sounds just very generic, transferable skill. A transferable skill is a skill that can transfer to many different workplaces. So this is the question to ask yourself when you are thinking about translating your graduate school story. What are some transferable skills that grad students in your field tend to have? And what ones are ones that you have? And the two ways people tend to do this is either look at lists of transferable skills or break down an experience they have into its component parts. Those component parts are really the skills. So yes, I'm seeing public speaking, teaching. Yes, these are things you can do in multiple contexts. So I'll put up, for example, let's say you have done a conference presentation, right? So example skills you might have in order to do that presentation. You had to analyze written works, you had to observe patterns within them, you had to apply critical theory to them, you had to write clearly, and then you had to present to an audience. Those are kind of breaking down the skills. And you can see I've highlighted in bold here, the ones that are most transferable are the ones that you will use in many, many different workplaces. There are some that are more specific, field specific, discipline specific. There are technical skills, like a certain programming language you might use as one example in some fields. But again, transferable skills, if you're not used to thinking about your experiences in terms of transferable skills, or those accomplishments from the earlier part, like what skills did you need to accomplish that thing in the 7 stories exercise? This is the part you're going to want to become much more familiar with. And I've included here on the slide some general skills particular to grad students. Skills are often grouped into clusters. So you'll see communication skills being grouped together, leadership or managerial skills sometimes. problem solving, analytical and conceptual skills. And then within each of these, there are a couple of different more specific skills, but ones that are still often very transferable. So these are some of the same ones that you guys mentioned here. So project management, mentoring, right? Serving as a resource, using a methodology. These are actually skills that employers do value if you can show that you have evidence of doing them, even if it's in a different context, if you can talk about ways in which they are transferable. So I have a few lists here. It's often helpful to see a few examples and then other resources for how people have translated these. One is from the Internship and Career Center. It's our general transferable skills inventory. You'll notice at the top, it also has a very similar to our 7 stories exercise. And then I'm also posting something here from Open Post Academics, translating academic skills. It has some more common skills specific to more humanities and social science graduate students, and then some resources to talk about how to go from there. So this is something to start doing for yourself, translating your skills. And again, here's another example. Anything that you might have listed from graduate school. Let's say you were a summer research fellow, right, in some position. Go through and break down all of the component skills. So identifying appropriate information sources, persuasive writing, managing a budget, qualitative research, project management. If you're doing this and you're also looking at your stories and seeing the themes, you will get a sense for both what you can do and what you most like to do of those things that you can do. This is a really important part of your story. And if you don't understand that and you don't know how to translate that, it's going to be more challenging. You can think of this as almost like code switching. It's still what you've done, but your audience needs to hear about it in a slightly different way. It needs to think about the component parts, the skills that you've used in different experiences and accomplishments. So get comfortable using the language of skills, and you'll be one step closer to really being able to do that well. Again, a quick right idea. As we're talking about skills, as you're maybe clicking through on the links here, write down for yourself or even share in the chat, what are 2 skills that you have from one of your grad school experiences? And again, these can be any of the things we've mentioned. It might be something that you are very, very comfortable with. Maybe you're, teaching or TAing, that you have skills. You're like, I've done this many times. I know I can do it well. I also encourage you to think about skills from your experiences, again, more broadly. So something that you did that was more service for your department or your profession, mentorship that was outside of teaching or TAing, something that is more community engaged scholarship, anything that has a component where you could break it down into its component skills. Take a minute right now and just write down what a few of those are, especially if they're ones you enjoy using. This is kind of your first chance to start doing this translating of your experiences into skills. Okay. I hope some of you have started to think of this. Great. I'm seeing more in there. Yeah, I'm gonna move on and say that for follow-up, maybe as I'm talking here, you're thinking this translating into skills part is the thing I really need to focus on. I kind of know what I enjoy doing. I know what I've done in graduate school and beyond. So what do you do to follow up here? So on your own, again, you can break down your experiences and accomplishments into the component skills, or you could take skills assessments, read up on the skills that might be needed in a field that interests you, right? I'm going to say that Imagine PhD is also another good resource for this, and you'll hear more about it if you come to the next PhD Unlimited presentation that's coming up. But Imagine PhD has a skills assessment. And then also has something, you'll learn more about this, but job families, where you can learn more about jobs that are kind of clustered together that might need similar skills. So it's a great way to start after you've done the translating of skills, starting to connect it to what do graduate students who have X kinds of skills, who really enjoy using those, what are the fields that tend to want someone with that skill set? One-on-one, might be an opportunity to think about if you are used to an academic CV that maybe doesn't really describe any of your experiences in terms of the skills or the accomplishments within them. It's more academic focused. Maybe you'd want to start drafting a resume, or maybe you've already drafted a resume and you want to get it reviewed at this point. Something that helps you focus on, am I describing the skills that I have from graduate school well, in language that an employer could value and understand. And we actually have a service for that that's relatively new that I wanted to point out, that it's available to graduate students and I believe also recent alums, and that includes, I think that would include most of these folks here. You could get initial feedback on your resume through this document review process. There's information about how you submit it through Google Docs and get some initial comments from our graduate student peer advisors at the ICC. So that might be a way to follow up on translating these skills. And then you might, again, find ways to do this with groups of people too. So you might find something, once you have started to assess the skills you have and like using, you might identify that you need to build one of those skills more. You might identify that there's a skill you don't have that you would really like to have and that might be necessary for the direction that you're going. So you want to be on the eye out for courses, workshops, any opportunities to build the skills that you know you'd like to have. And for this, I would say you want to be on the lookout. There's a lot of good newsletters, like email newsletters, where you might be able to keep an eye out for opportunities to build skills through courses or workshops. And yes, I'm not going into the details of CV versus resume here, but I can just say very briefly that typically a CV would be more academic focused. It would be longer. It would be kind of indefinite length, many pages, everything you've done with a focus on your research, your teaching, your academic service. That's typically the document you would use for a tenure track academic job. But for most jobs outside of that path, you would use a resume, and it's usually either 1 or 2 pages. It's much more tailored to the job, and it also has information about the skills and accomplishments in those work experiences and volunteer experiences. So yeah, it might be a topic for another conversation, another workshop about translating that CV to a resume. This is a great first step though, is thinking about those component skills. Okay, so let's say you've already done some reframing of your story for yourself. You started to translate it into a little bit more of the language of skills. There is one more step before and this is even before you are actively applying for jobs. You can do this step, prototyping, telling your graduate school story. So prototyping meaning trying out rough drafts, trying out telling your story to folks beyond academia, and also trying out hearing their story. So this is a really important component. I'm going to spend a little time here. In academia, when you're thinking about preparing for a job search, that might mainly mean searching for jobs, applying online, working on your documents, and talking mainly to your advisor, letter of reference writers. So those kind of main mentor figure faculty about it. But if you are going to be telling your story for employers beyond academia, you want to be having multiple career conversations with many people before and during your job search, before there's even a job you're interested in, before you're even, in that last couple months and you're about to graduate, starting early. And I'd say many people, that would mean anyone who is a near peer to an experienced professional who, especially if they have a connection to or doing something outside of academia or outside of the tenure track career path that interests you. You want to start having those conversations so you can practice trying out your story and practice hearing other stories who've made that transition. So trying things out is an iterative process. You have multiple iterations. That's what prototyping is. It is creating multiple rough drafts, multiple iterations of your story. You try it out, you refine it. You try it out again, you refine it again. So that when you are applying to a job that interests you with an employer beyond academia, it's not the first time you have done this. You have done this for many people in many different situations. And I think I saw something, some interest in knowing about an elevator pitch. So that's great. We're going to actually mention that here. An elevator pitch would just, we say that because it should be short enough to say it if you were in an elevator with someone. It's a short introduction of yourself to a professional, typically a non-academic professional. So this would highlight past experiences, transferable skills, and interests. Right? So this is a way to try out if you're doing that short introduction. That's something you want to try out several times, prototype that. Another great way to do this is in something we call informational interviews. So if you've not heard this term, that's okay. It's not a job interview. It is a conversation. It's a career conversation where you are talking to someone who works in a job, field, or organization that interests you, asking questions and listening to what they have to say. That one's really much more than the elevator pitch about listening. You are the interviewer of someone who knows more than you do and you want to ask them questions. It's a conversation that you have with them. These are great ways to try out your story and to hear how others tell their story. If you remember nothing else from this workshop, I strongly recommend incorporating this into crafting your story. And I actually get a lot of questions about this specifically, like, okay, I want to do that. I want to have these conversations. I want to try out my elevator pitch and telling my story. I do not know how to do that. And my instinct is just to do what I always do and introduce myself the same way I always do. I'm going to recommend thinking about it differently, trying out from a different perspective based on what I've said in this workshop. So prototyping to reach out to ask for an informational interview, ask to have this conversation. I'm going to give you an example of one that's not ideal. This is not the most helpful way to prototype your story. So here is the not ideal way. You reached out, you wanted someone, this is a hypothetical, this is not a real person. So hi, I'm a PhD candidate at UC Davis, where my dissertation is an intersectional examination of racialized health narratives that impacted late 20th century medical practices. I'm thinking about all tech jobs since the market is so bad. And your job sounded really interesting to me. Do you have some time to talk about your job? This might be the story for yourself right now. This is kind of how you think about yourself and what you would be feeling and what you might say. But this is not the most helpful way to start prototyping your story. Is there anyone who can identify in the chat anything that strikes them as not helpful about reaching out to someone? This is, again, this is somebody who has a job outside of academia, and this is a hypothetical PhD student reaching out to them. Why is this not the most helpful? All right, I'm seeing jargon with ALTAC. Yes. Leave out the opinion bad. Yeah, so just it's kind of focusing on the negative of the academic job market, yeah, sounding negative. Yeah, I see they might not know or care about your dissertation. Yeah, I don't have any sense of why that would be. Making this other person's job that they're reaching out to this person to talk to about as a second choice. They're too niche. It's not really showing excitement about the field that this person is in. All of these are the reasons. Yeah, this is really centering academia. It really doesn't, if I'm receiving this, I don't know why this person wants to talk to me. I don't know why their dissertation, why they think it relates. It's not really a prototype that can help you to tell that story better. It's still kind of the same story, but for an external audience. So let me give you an example. This is not like a perfect example. This would just be an example of a better way to prototype and reach out. So, hello, say their name. I saw you speak on a virtual panel about your work as a UX researcher, user experience researcher for diversity and inclusion initiatives at XYZ company, and I wanted to reach out to follow up. Your job fascinates me as I'm an English PhD candidate at UC Davis doing qualitative research on racial health disparities. I'd love to hear more about how you found your way into the field of user experience research. Do you have some time to video chat about your job in the next few weeks? So I have already kind of identified some things that are good here, but if you see some things that are improvement, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. Things that this person did in this hypothetical better example of prototyping their story in this reaching out for an informational interview. You'll notice that it is more positive. You notice that they'll say, yeah, they're saying why this person wants to reach out. They identify how they've heard of the person. This is so important and we often forget, but how do you know your audience for this story? And yeah, it's actually not even totally focused on themselves. The information about their research is really the part that relates to what this person does, right? The part that and language that kind of makes sense. Again, qualitative research being a skill, racial health disparities being like the interest, right? Clearly, this is a little bit more someone who's indicating some interest, some excitement about actually having this conversation. The very end, even, I think that this is just a helpful tip. It's nice to be specific. So this person actually, in this hypothetical example, says, do you have time to video chat about your job in the next few weeks? So there's a time frame. They've even indicated they specifically want to know how this person found their way to their field of UX research. So that's something like they know what the conversation is going to be about. Again, this is a better way to prototype that story, to start practicing it. And if they hear back from this hypothetical person, then they would hear that person's story. They've already indicated they want to hear how you found your way. So that's a great conversation opener. So that's going to be good prototyping in both ways. Great. Yeah, thank you for the feedback here. Again, here's a quick write for you. As I'm saying this, there's probably at least one person, maybe you just kind of remember their title or maybe just their first name, someone you could jot down, someone who you know, or maybe just whose name you have seen somewhere, whose job intrigued you. Who is this person for you? Who is this hypothetical person that you could write to and actually, say, I want to have this conversation, a conversation about your career or your journey to this kind of job or what you do in this organization. Who is that person for you? Is there that person for you? Because there might be someone that if you thought about this as an important part of crafting your story for employers before there's even a job on the table, you could reach out to. You could be brave and say, I want to start practicing telling my story, and I also want to practice listening. Listening is really important here in the prototyping because that will give you just as much information as practicing your elevator pitch or your, kind of your reaching out for an informational interview. When you ask professionals to tell their story, really listen and try to ask good questions that will get them to tell the parts of the story that interest you. So I have a few examples here that I think are useful. For example, this person, let's say they have a graduate degree and then they're in a different career field, they're not in a tenure track position. You might ask them, how did you make that transition from graduate school to career? You want to know that part of their story. What about what skills does someone need to do well in your kind of work? Oh, that's such a great question, right? You actually can hear them say from their perspective what skills they need, what skills they use, what skills they like using. What is something you wish you had known before making this transition? Another great question. Tells you something that you wouldn't even thought to ask, something that they kind of wish they could have gone back as they were in that part of their story. This is just such a great way to start having these conversations and start listening to people as they tell you their stories. And you probably either know someone or you've seen someone whose name is out there or who's been on a panel, who someone who's alumni of your field. If you don't know, again, that's something I can help you with if you're trying to find someone to tell your story to and to listen to their story. That's something we can actually work on. That's one of the follow-ups. So follow-up, if you're at the prototyping your story stage, on your own, There are a lot of virtual career events, virtual career panels, employer information sessions, kind of networking components of conferences, career development, professional development component to events. Look for those and attend them. Start listening to other stories. Start trying to find someone who you would like to talk to and start telling your story to. Again, one-on-one advising, this is a key thing I do in my job. You can make an advising appointment specifically to discuss how to build your network. And I can talk about why you're doing it, how you're doing it, how to reach out. You can even, prototype those messages you want to send. In a group, there are virtual events with an interactive component sometimes, even online. We're going to switch over to that in a little bit here with the Q&A. Look for places where you could do that. Look for places that have kind of more of a conversation or a group that meets on Zoom. And I'll give you a few examples. We have some job search support groups for people who are actively searching for jobs right now that we've been hosting through the Internship and Career Center, facilitated by a graduate student peer advisor. There's one coming up specifically for graduate students in your field. I'll put that in the chat. Another one that I've heard of, it's not the UC Davis specifically, but I know people have had good experiences with, and I've attended once, is Open Post Academics. They have a weekly coffee chat. So these are people who were in the process of, or who are post academia, but most of them have PhDs in fields similar to yours. So they do a coffee chat over Zoom. I think it's at noon on Fridays. Again, these are just places to start having these conversations in groups. So if you're looking to start a little easier than one-on-one, or reaching out to someone from a panel that you want to talk to, or someone in a career who interests you, that's another good way to start as well. Okay, so putting it all together. The great part is that when you see or hear about a job, something that's beyond that tenure track professor job, and you want to apply for that, you can use and incorporate everything from this workshop. I mean, first, you do want to read the job posting carefully, thinking about what's that employer story, what skills do they seek, right? So thinking in the language from this workshop. Then you'd want to reflect on your own reframed story, asking yourself, does this job align with your own values and accomplishments, right, that you are more familiar with now? You'd want to recall any prototyping conversations you'd had. So what did you learn from practicing your story? What did you learn from hearing the stories of others? And then finally, and this one's a little bit beyond the scope of this workshop, but that's a component you can work on after doing these things, you can start to revise your application materials to make sure that they are highlighting any transferable skills and notable accomplishments. So this would be crafting a tailored resume or cover letter that are designed for a non-academic job. Again, that's something that I can help you with an advising appointment, or you can have those initially reviewed via our document review process. If you're a UC Davis graduate student, these are services that are available to you. So again, you don't wait until there's an actual job or an employer that you're actively trying to connect to. You can actually start, if you want to start right now. You can start early, you can start before you know exactly what that's going to be, crafting your graduate school story for employers. Okay, so I'm going to transition now. Make sure I'll put these links in the chat here, but I wanted to make sure that we had some time for a more in-depth Q&A. So I do want, since this is kind of concluding the formal workshop portion, I want to make sure that you guys, if you get a chance to, you can either scan that QR code or visit that URL to give an evaluation of this event. I mentioned advising appointments. Oh, that link is not showing up very well. I mentioned advising appointments. We use a platform called Handshake to schedule that. And so you can see my availability there, and you can schedule an advising appointment if you want to talk about anything one-on-one related to your own career development. I mentioned finding events and groups, and you might wonder, where can I find some of those things? One place is our ICC Grad Careers newsletter. So it's just events and job postings specifically for the master's, PhD, or postdoc level from all fields. So there's a sign up link there. And then finally, we do have a web page, and I'm trying to build this out a little more. That's specific part of the ICC that's for masters, PhDs, and postdocs. And so you'll see both the services that we have, but that if you scroll down at the bottom of that page, there's an event calendar that populates with the events that are specific to your level. So you'll see, for example, there's a LinkedIn workshop that I'm doing in February that might interest you. So that's a little bit about some follow-up resources here as well. And I'm going to stop my share now and make sure I can start to answer some of the questions. And Stephanie, I think that they're probably at the end of the recording.